And I inadvertently absented Jeff and Cindy. I thought you were still in Vermont. I thought you were still in Massachusetts. But we're happy that you're here. And everyone at home who's listening, we're starting today's lesson in Mark chapter 15, verse 16. It's the time that is immediately after Jesus has been flogged. We suffered through that along with Jesus last week. It was painful and absolutely horrific. I told you that modern theologians, scientific theologians, claim that flogging was one of the most inhumane punishments known to man. It was worse than suffering from third-degree burns.
Really?
And because in seminary, in divinity school, we had to do pastoral education, so we had to visit hospitals and treatment centers. And I think one of the most difficult places I ever visited was the burn ward of a hospital in Hartford. It's the pain just seemed absolutely intolerable, without relief. So keeping that in mind, and I'll just tell you what we're planning tentatively, what we were discussing before we started taping, and I invite you all to give us your opinion. We're going to finish this chapter and the next chapter of Mark, and then, excuse me, before we start the Gospel of Matthew, we're going to do a few weeks, oh, Jeanette's here too. We're going to do a few weeks of miscellaneous. That means any topic that has some connection to the Bible, biblical characters, whether they're true or fiction, anything you always wanted to know but were afraid to ask. And we likened it to the freedom of discovering what a bagpiper is wearing under his coat. So you can make that decision and share your questions. And anything that looks shady, I'll give it to Jeff first, and then if it's appropriate, he could pass them to me. All right? So that's good. Hello, darling.
Hello.
How was your trip?
Yeah. Really good, and a little disappointing I couldn't get to New York City, but it's all right. Are these, what books
Those
are
are
we
our Bibles.
using? Okay.
Those, yep, that's ours.
Okay.
And we are starting our lesson right now. It's 1 minute after 11, on Mark chapter 15, verse 16.
You have a page
Um,
number?
Yes. 1690.
Jesus survived the flogging. So Mark says the soldiers led Jesus away to the courtyard of the governor's residence. Now we're not really sure exactly where that was, but we can be sure that the soldiers didn't just lead Jesus away. They had to have dragged him away, or actually carried him to the courtyard, because chances are he couldn't have walked by himself because of his wounds. He was flogged at least 40 times with that flagellum. Oh, and I have some things for you in just a second to show you when we get closer. Across his back, remember his hands were over his head. He was flogged across his neck, his back, and his legs. All the skin back there were just hanging in ribbons. So he wouldn't have been, and in many cases, had gone even deeper than skin and fat layer, gone all the way to the muscles. So he couldn't have walked because of those wounds. So once they got to the courtyard with Jesus, that's when they called the whole company together. And then, right in front of everyone, the soldiers dressed the naked Jesus in purple. Remember, they had taken everything off of him to flog him. But now that he's in front of everybody again, they dress him in purple. Maybe it was purple, but maybe it was scarlet. It depends on who you read. And then after they dressed him, then they crowned him. And doesn't it say in your Bible, with a garland of woven thorns? Yeah. A garland. So they went to this plant, pulled off the branches of this plant, tied it into a garland, and then wove it around Jesus's head. And it was thorn woven around his head, thorns. Jesus had already been through so much anguish, starting way back in the Garden of Gethsemane, all that trauma and the fear and the anxiety, terror, and then he got through the flogging somehow, painful agony beyond comprehension. And then he gets the purple robe. Now, does anyone have any idea why the soldiers dressed Jesus in the color purple?
Royalty. They were already calling him King of the Jews,
Yeah.
perhaps?
Right? Yeah, I think we all.
Royal purple.
That color?
Sorry?
Does that color symbolize?
Yes.
Royal.
Royalty.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know if the garment was a robe or if it was a tunic, if it was linen or wool or silk, but we are fairly certain, at least according to Mark, that it was a purple garment. And we all know who Alice Walker is, right? Do you remember Alice Walker? She's a national treasure. She's still alive. She lives in North Carolina now. She's the one who wrote the book, The Color Purple. Now, the book is not a story of the passion of Jesus, but maybe Alice Walker gives us an idea of why the color purple is in our story today, even though it's over 2,000 years old. Why did Mark put it in his story? Now, of course, we know the facts of the story. In first century Israel, as you all said, purple was the color that was reserved for royalty, probably because it was so rare, because it was so expensive to produce the color purple. You had to go literally fish it out of the water. You had to go harvest these kind of clams or mollusks. So you had to go, and they were kind of like oysters or something, and then you had to take them out of the shells, and then you had to extract the dye from the shells and the mollusks to get the dye to color the cloth. And these mollusks were the only source of the substance that was needed to dye a fabric purple. And they were hard to find, and it was expensive to extract the dye. So that's what made the color special and rare and expensive. And that's why it was reserved for royalty. So we can see, as you all mentioned, the soldiers are mocking Jesus with the color purple. They're sort of following up on Pilate's question. Are you the king of the Jews? So they put Jesus in purple to mock the possibility that he could even be a king. But Alice Walker, she has another take on the color purple. And I really like this. She seems to ponder, to think about, and she does it through one of the characters in her book, Shook. If you haven't read The Color Purple yet, read it. It's a wonderful book, and she really gets you thinking color purple when she writes, have you ever noticed that the color purple is actually very rare in the natural world? There aren't a lot of things that grow naturally purple. Now we see flowers that are dyed purple. As soon as they're picked, the florist sticks them in a dye that is absorbed. But not many things actually grow purple. It's just a very rare natural color. So, yes?
That book right there, it's called The Indigo Girl, is a very unbelievable description of how you manufacture and grow the color purple.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm going to take
And
that
that
with
was
me.
done by the woman who the story is about, the woman who was the mother of the first Chief Justice of our Supreme Court, John Marshall.
John Marshall.
That way back in colonial
Oh,
Tell us the name again.
interesting.
It's called The Indigo Girl, it's right there.
Okay.
Oh, we'll have to look at that for sure, for sure. Well, because it's so rare in the natural world,
That's true.
there just aren't a lot of things that grow purple.
Uh-huh.
So Alice Walker warns, when you walk by purple flowers, or you walk by a whole field of purple. Now I've never done that, but I know people who have seen a field of lavender in bloom. I've seen it in pictures, it's extraordinary. But Alice says, if you ever experience that, you better make note of it. You better notice it, or else God will be pissed. He'll be really annoyed that you didn't appreciate the color purple that he put there just for you. And everyone knows it's not good to piss off God, right? So, I didn't say that. So appreciate the gift of the color purple. Now, is that kind of the message you get from that book, The Indigo Girl?
Yeah, the color purple was very, very difficult to
Produce.
Even in
manufacture.
colonial times.
Oh,
It was, and they didn't have it in the United States.
No, it was imported
It it had to be
in
imported.
the Carolinas.
Mhm,
There was only
Oh.
one area in Carolina where it would grow.
mhm.
Oh, those
It was
mussels.
based on a true story.
No, it had nothing to do with
No,
mussels.
No, the indigo is a plant.
It was
Oh,
It
indigo,
was the
indigo.
grain.
Why just there?
I don't know, it has
Indigo
something to do
grounds.
with the soil.
Yeah.
Now, when
There's
I
other
think
places would
indigo,
really
I
grow.
think blue, but I guess it's different,
No.
It's a
like an
Purple.
iridescent.
It's a purple blue color,
Dye.
very deep,
Dye.
very deep color.
It's a fantastic
Yeah,
book.
it's
Oh,
really,
yeah,
really
That's
good.
it, we have one copy.
Well, let's get back to poor Jesus sitting there in purple. And we should always notice Jesus, no matter what he's wearing, right? But have you noticed, in your work in the Bible, that not all the gospel writers dress Jesus in purple? Mark does, but Matthew puts Jesus in a scarlet robe. And we'll talk about that when we get to Matthew's gospel. But no matter what color, the dressing and the crowning are more examples of group cruelty, publicly displayed. All of it is meant to humiliate Jesus. And you can see that in verse 18. The soldiers continue taunting Jesus. They yell at him, "Greeting, King of the Judeans," and they keep hitting him on the head with a staff. Some translations call the staff a reed. What does it say in your Bible?
Reed.
And
It
spat.
says a staff,
Oh, it says both?
This
no, mine
says,
says a staff.
this says
Reed.
read,
Reed.
Reed and spat.
read and
But can
Here's
you,
the thing.
can you
Spit on
see
it.
that there's a difference between a reed and a staff?
Well,
When-
I think that if it's already a crown on him, that's where I think the reed comes in, because they can hit them with it, but it's not gonna kill them. I mean,
Right,
it's gonna hurt at each time, but a staff?
exactly,
a
because
staff
what's a staff? A
I
staff
don't think
is
a
like
a staff
a
is killing.
walking stick, right?
Yeah.
Wooden, and I have neighbors, one of them
Mhm.
uses two of them to walk. I always thought it was for balance, but apparently it's for upper body exercise, you know? But back in the day, people walked with a staff for protection. You could use it as a club to get rid of a robber who wanted to, or a wild animal who was thinking of attacking you. But a reed, you know, think about a reed, that's kind of different, because a reed is like a long, hollow piece of grass, right? It's not wooden, not hard, it's more like a pool noodle, right? It wouldn't be good for protection. So you can see though that sort of both descriptions work here, but don't you think the reed works better? Mark says, because the soldiers keep hitting Jesus on the head, and they couldn't keep hitting him with a staff. How many times
No.
could you be hit on the head with a staff?
Where does it say he was flogged 40 times?
It doesn't, but that was,
Oh, okay.
well, it does, traditionally, it was the maximum. you were
That'll kill you.
allowed.
40, you're gone.
That's right.
So what,
So we're just assuming, you know, this is
Well, he
Rome.
didn't die by flogging.
I know, he should have.
So, yeah, but maybe he wasn't flogged 40 times.
But,
I
It
don't know
doesn't
if you
matter
can
whether
say
he was
40
flogged
would
40
be-
times or not, it meant
but he's
just that he
bleeding,
was.
lots of blood.
Yeah, lots and
Right,
lots.
Before he
right.
gets to the cross.
Yeah,
Tissue.
yeah.
So why do you think these soldiers are hitting Jesus on the head with this flimsy reed? One reason only, right? To aggravate him, right? To mock him, to humiliate him.
Mock him.
Which is exactly what they do in verse 19. What do they do in verse 19?
Spit on him.
They spit on Jesus. And they spit for a purpose. Because spitting is not a symbolic act here in Jesus. I'm so sorry, in Mark's gospel. Spitting on Jesus is real. It's a way to show your contempt for that person, complete disrespect. And even today, I think we take spitting very seriously, don't we? And did you know that spitting on someone is still a crime in this country?
Really?
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least it is for now.
Yeah.
But we've all seen on TV that protesters do it all the time.
It symbolizes such
Yeah,
negativity, like
Yeah.
disgust us.
and now if you have friends or relatives in law enforcement, and you told the story about your husband
Yeah.
being spit on as a soldier coming back from the war. We talked about the fact that spitting is not safe. It's actually disgusting because you're bringing up sputum that carries pathogens, right, that can spread disease like TB. TB was a big one in my day. I actually got tuberculosis for working in, twice. I got it twice for working in New York City slums. It's a disease of poor people, and it's very easy to catch it. Now we test people nowadays, but doctor said, and I was only like 20 when I got it the first time. And doctor said, you probably got it from those kids you were teaching, you know, in Bed-Stuy, but who knows? It was very good. But certainly during COVID, it was a problem, and just even the flu.
HIV.
Yes, absolutely. So spitting is actually classified as a crime under battery and assault. But the real purpose of spitting on someone is to show disrespect, I think, to show that you disagree strongly with that person on whom you are spitting, right? But it's probably better to spit on someone than shoot them in the back or in the neck, right? Well, for Jesus, spitting was just part of the process, because after the soldiers spit on Jesus, then they began to bow down to him, just to mock him, right? They got down on their knees and they pretend that they're showing homage. They're just making fun of him, but they thought it was hilarious, and plenty of other people there did too. And that's what happens with group shaming. And it's so dangerous because it's so contagious. So when it's not stopped, it usually leads to more violent behavior. Now that the spitters were protesting in Jerusalem, then they finally stopped. The soldiers stopped spitting, they stopped taunting, for now at least, and they took the purple robe off Jesus, and they dressed him back in his normal, regular clothes. And then they led him away to be crucified. Now, Mark never mentions it, but do you think that we should assume that Jesus is still wearing his crown of thorns, that garland of thorns? Yeah, that's right. Don't you always picture it that way?
Yeah, on the cross.
Yeah, me too. Which of course is another way the Roman soldiers mocked our Savior. That was a fake crown. Just a crown there to show their contempt. Sorry?
I wonder what happened to the purple robe that he.
Oh,
Or is
we're
that-
gonna find out.
does
We're
that
gonna
exist
find
anywhere?
out, right?
What happened to the what?
The purple
robe.
The
robe.
purple robe,
Oh.
when they took out, where did that go? Did they
Yes,
toss it?
we're
Somebody
gonna
collect
talk
it?
about that. So we know, I think we can believe that this crown of thorns was placed on Jesus's head as a sign of humiliation. And it wasn't just there to humiliate Jesus. I think it was placed there to hurt him. Because those thorns on those they're old, but they still grow in Israel, those thorn bushes. They were like needles, long needles, and they were driven into Jesus's scalp. And we all know that the scalp, if you ever get a head wound, we know it bleeds profusely, because there's actually a very large blood supply right under your scalp, because it's there to regulate the temperature in your head to protect your brain, which is your major power supply, right? But your scalp is also very sensitive to pain. And the soldiers knew that, everyone knew that. So they made sure that Jesus would suffer more than just the emotional pain of being mocked. They made sure he would also suffer the physical pain of having like sharp needle-like thorns shoved directly into your scalp. And of course the blood, someone mentioned the blood, that was just an extra added attraction, because blood just poured down from his head, down in his face and into his eyes. So it must have been so difficult for him to see, impossible for him to walk. But Mark doesn't say impossible. Mark infers that Jesus was still trying to move. He was struggling. He was stumbling. Oh my goodness, guess what I'm just reading here? Start here at our Savior on July 9th. And here we are. So we just did. But that's okay, you were in here last week, so we're glad you're here today. Well, here's poor Jesus. And I've passed you all. This is from, believe it or not, these 2 pages came out of a book. Welcome to Becoming a Lutheran. It has a section, we used it, to welcome classes at Emmanuel. It's a good program. In any case, it gives you a little information, historical information, on how we kind of see the crucifix in our mind and how historians tell us we should be seeing it. But, as I said, we're picturing Jesus after the flogging, after the mocking, after the dressing, the undressing, the redressing. But Jesus is still moving, he's still struggling. So, the Roman authorities, meaning the soldiers, they grab a passerby to help Jesus get to his death. Mark actually says they conscripted someone. What does it say in your Bible? They conscripted someone named Simon of Cyrene. Compelled.
They forced it.
They forced someone, yeah. And then, which I think was so uncharacteristic of Mark, Mark goes on to tell us a lot about this guy, Simon of Cyrene. Usually Mark just says, and then so-and-so did this and did that, but doesn't tell us about the so-and-so. But Mark says Simon was coming in from the country. Do you see that in your Bible? So that means that Simon didn't live in Jerusalem. And we know that Simon had kids, had two boys, Alexander and Rufus. And that in itself is quite amazing. So you may be asking yourself, who are Alexander and Rufus? And that's sort of the amazing part, because the first people listening to Mark's gospel, they didn't have to ask who they were, because they already knew them. They knew Simon, they knew his boys, and they even knew Simon's wife. And Paul seems to have known Rufus, because in his letter to the Romans, Paul mentions Rufus and his mother, who is Simon's wife. Maybe, we think maybe, yeah.
In one portrayal in a movie,
Oh,
I saw that Simon had not been conscripted, but that he was only one younger son with him, and he was pushing him, Father,
help
why don't
him.
you help him?
Oh, do you remember what movie that was?
It might have been,
Quo Vadis?
no, I'm thinking the guy with the short hair, I can't remember his name, big nose. It was
White guy
just
or black guy?
white, well,
Interesting.
Arabic, so
Mel Brooks?
it's just recently.
It'll come, yeah. Interesting. Well, let's go back, and we're gonna talk about that. Maybe it'll refresh your memory. Because right now, Mark says one of the soldiers grabs Simon to help Jesus carry his cross. So I think that's very interesting. We're trying to figure out who is this guy Simon. And we certainly know more about Simon than we knew about that naked guy, right, that slipped out of his tunic. Mark gives us a lot more information. So the scholars say that clearly Mark and his community must have known Simon and knew him well. For example, we know Simon is from Cyrene. Now, do you know where Cyrene is? It's in Libya, North Africa. Now, at that time, when Mark is writing, or when Jesus, I should say, is being crucified, Cyrene is a Greek city with a large Jewish population, and it actually became the center of the early Christian church. And we know at that time, when Jesus is being crucified, Cyrene was prosperous enough to build and maintain a worship temple in Jerusalem. that was used when people from Cyrene came to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festivals like Passover and Sukkot and Shavuot. Now, North Africa, right, and it's a decent, well-to-do little area. They can afford to build a temple so that when people come to Jerusalem to worship as, they're all Jews, of course, to worship as Jews at the temple, they have a place to stay. They have a place to congregate with each other and stay safe in this very crowded city of Jerusalem. But now, who wants to explain why this person, Simon of Cyrene, was such a key figure for some people, especially in the early African American church community? And here's the hint, it has to do with a movie. That's why I was asking you, has anyone ever seen the movie, The Greatest Story Ever Told?
Of course.
Yeah.
Probably.
I don't think I've seen it.
Cecil.
Yes,
B.
it
Man,
is.
it's so
Yeah.
long
It's
ago.
a very long movie too.
Oh, is it?
Classic.
They usually have it on during the Easter season.
Yes. They do.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna see if I
And I
can
think
find it. Because
3.5 hours or something.
Oh, it's a long one, it's
Yeah.
a long one.
the character of Simon of Cyrene in that movie was played by Sidney Poitier,
Oh.
a black man. That's why I asked you, was it a
Yeah.
white guy or a black guy? Now Mark never says that Simon is black, but clearly Sidney Poitier is, right?
Well, why would he have to? If you know,
If everybody knew
knew
him.
and they know about
Exactly.
Cyrene.
Right.
Exactly,
Yeah.
he didn't have to mention that Simon was black because everybody knew what he looked like. But even before this film came out, for some people, Simon of Cyrene became a role model, either a positive role model or a negative role model for the black church in the United States. And maybe it was a little bit of both. So see what you think. This is how I've heard it. Here's this poor black guy in Jerusalem, and he does all the work because he's compelled to do it by the white guys, the Roman soldiers. They grabbed him, and against his will, they conscripted him, compelled him, they enslaved him. Simon of Cyrene didn't want to carry the cross, but he had no choice. White law enforcement figures made him do it. Now we can, yes,
I'm reading in mine how it says, they compelled a certain man, Simon, and it says that, he was coming out of the country and passing by Tiberias Cross. So was Simon wrong place, wrong time?
yeah,
They just said, hey, you, and it just happened to be
Absolutely.
him, just
absolutely.
unlucky.
Or maybe he was grabbed because it was a white guy who, you know, a Roman soldier wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable grabbing just any white guy. What if it was a prominent guy in town? But
So
a
just
black
say,
guy, yeah.
Who said he was
Okay.
black?
Well, we're thinking
Because he was-
because he comes from
Because,
Libya,
yes.
which is in North Africa. Now, we don't know if he was a diaspora Jew and he was just Semitic. We don't know. Mark doesn't say it. These are just assumptions, but we'll see what those assumptions have done to people in today's world. Because we can all retell the stories in the Bible so that they tell the stories that we want other people to hear. And how does that happen? We turn to inference. Oh, well, he was from North Africa, so we infer that he was probably black. We assume someone must have been like that if he was from there, whatever like that means at that particular
The
time.
names are not black.
I was just gonna say, except that people who live in Libya now are not black. I mean, they have a darker skin tone. It's not like, oh, these are black people who live in Libya. They have
True,
a darker
yeah,
skin
because so
tone,
much,
but not the black features or whatever that you think of as an African people, so.
But there are,
Yeah. But
I see that.
Alexander and Rufus are certainly not black names, because back then Rufus was a very common,
Very, very common.
very common white name.
Very common name.
Good point.
Hmm?
Good point, yeah.
But of course, it was a common name for black guys too. You
Who
know,
says?
well, we infer that it was. Very interesting. I just read this and I found it so interesting. Must have been like that. Rodney Stark said, God rest his soul, he just died. He said, must have been like that is one of the most suspect phrases in scholarly vocabulary. Instead of saying,
Assumptions.
exactly, we should say instead, must have been, should be translated as, we really don't know, but perhaps it was like this, or she was like that, but we don't say that. Oh, well,
Might have been.
right, if he grew up in Bed-Stuy, then he must have been poor and dumb and blah, 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 or, oh my gosh, if she was born and her father belonged to Birmingham Country Club, boy, if I heard about that place enough, you know, she must have been, very blah, blah, blah. We do that. That's just what we do. Now, we talked about this at Divinity School in our class. I was required to take 2 semesters of a class called Black Liberation Theology. And it was clear in that class that the students were divided into two groups, African Americans and everyone else. And the African Americans in my class did not expect anyone else to identify with this story that we're reading the way they did. And it had nothing to do with color. It wasn't about being black, because there were black Africans in that class, but not black African Americans. Black men from Africa, but for black African Americans, for the men and women in that class, the black African opinions were seen the same way that non-African opinions were seen. Unreliable. Yeah, totally unreliable. And of course, what was the reason for that? Slavery. That's what made those black African members of the class, they had never been captured, put on a boat and dragged across the Atlantic, right? They got to live in Africa till they flew over and joined the class at Yale Divinity. So they didn't know any more about slavery than I did, and we say, well, my parents were born in Ireland, and they were kind of slaves to that colonial system that, the potato famine and so on and so forth. But it's not the same, and that was very, 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 very clear. It's not about color, it's not about ethnicity, it's about the trauma of slavery. And many believe that the trauma of slavery is actually generationally inherited, like the color of your eyes. Somehow that trauma is passed to you genetically. Very difficult for us. None of us here are in that position. But when you talk to someone who believes this, it's credible. I mean, I believe that they believe it. And I believe that I can, unless you share that history, you can never relate to that experience. And I remember arguing that Simon was not African American, right? and he was really a member of two communities. He was a Jew, but he was also a citizen of Rome, just like Paul was. But there was no use citing the facts either about the whole Roman army. It was a multicultural army. There were black guys and white guys and Jews and pagans, all kinds of people in that army. But it didn't matter to those in the class who were carrying the trauma of slavery. And it's interesting, I think, this pericope in Mark started this discussion in that class, even though Mark never describes Cyrene. They just assumed that was part of their story and could never be a part of my story. It's interesting. And I think some people still feel that way about some pieces of the Bible. Oh, you're a Muslim, you could never understand this. And there are Muslims who say, you're reading the Quran in English, you'll never understand it until you learn to read it in Arabic. And trust me, you won't learn to read it in Arabic in this lifetime. I tried. So hard. But the truth is, according to Mark, we have no idea who Simon was. And the interesting part is, we never hear from him again. Mark doesn't give us a clue about what happens to him. Maybe, just maybe, Paul knew Simon's son, Rufus. But, because you can read about it, if you go to Romans, I think it's 16, Paul mentions Rufus. But like Bonnie said, Rufus was such a popular name, we're not sure if Paul is talking about this Rufus.
Pomponia had a son named Rufus.
Who did?
Pomponia.
Oh my goodness. Yes, and that's one of the miscellaneous things we're going to talk about. You can share with us. But have you ever really thought about Simon of Cyrene? Did you ever spend much time thinking about him? So now that we just spent a little time with him, what do you think? Do you think he's a real
Excuse me.
person? Yes,
It
Jeanette.
occurred to me after we said that in the act of carrying the cross, it's, perhaps they had, he had compassion, they had their moment of, you have helped me, you have blessed me. I don't know, it just came to me.
Right,
That
right.
they might have forged a relationship right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you look at that, parts of the cross that I passed to you, that, you can see that Jesus, we always picture Jesus carrying the entire cross, right? This whole thing. But scholars say probably not. Probably, it was just, he was just carrying that cross piece. Not the, it's on that paper that I
Oh,
passed
yeah.
to
Well,
you.
there's something millennious to talk about.
Sorry?
There's something millennious to talk
Yes,
about.
absolutely.
Because
Yes, we should definitely.
just, I've heard both
Yeah.
here and here.
And here.
And they backed it up, that if it goes through here, if they put a nail in there, then there's just rope they use here to tie his hands to the.
Oh, that makes
Because it would
sense.
tear
They had that.
through.
Yeah.
They had that. So there's that version and there's this version. Where's the truth in that?
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't matter, bottom line.
Well,
but
we're
we
actually
wanna
gonna-
know. I've always questioned that. What was it? What did it go through here?
We're actually
did it
gonna
here?
talk, we're gonna talk about that. Just, I don't know if we'll get to it
May I
today.
say one thing?
Yes,
In Catholic churches, the nail is always
Stigmata.
here in the palm. I had to read it because it was a time I was studying a non-Jesus religion, and I kind of thought that God didn't make him suffer that much. It's like, anyway, it described the entire thing going into here
into the
with
wrist.
the excruciating pain that it caused, and of course, whether it would be the palm or this, it would still be tearing, as he tried to get bread.
Mhm.
Anyway.
Yeah, I'll talk about this a little later, but I remember it from school, but none of us paid any attention. We had a scientific theologian to come in and talk to us about, but this was a very common way.
Yeah.
Put them both
Yeah.
together, and
Yeah.
you only needed one nail or one set of ties, over the head, which was supposed to be, I mean, how do we do this? How do we figure out how much we can hurt people? Just amazing.
I picture he only had that one piece on him when he was
Yeah.
walking through. 'Cause
Yeah,
I'm sure that's a thick wood, and for him to walk with the whole thing, I mean, how long is that?
yeah,
'Cause you gotta
because,
bury it into the ground, and this thing must
exactly.
be extremely large, how would he carry that? I know somebody helped him, yes, but still,
And
I
how
would
would they
assume
have,
that's-
How would a healthy person carry that for the
Yeah,
distance that they
it must, the
For a
cross
foot,
must be
you-
immense, it must be huge.
exactly,
I find it hard to believe they would have that
Exactly.
whole.
yeah. Well,
That's
we're gonna, as I said, we're gonna spend a little bit of time talking about that, but what about Simon? Do you think Simon was actually a real person? Doesn't he seem to be, Mark wouldn't just put him in
There's a
there,
lot of
right?
detail.
He must have had some interest to the people Mark was talking to. He must have had some role in Jesus's,
for him to mention the sons and give that information, it would have to be somebody that people would have been familiar with, seems
Right.
like it anyway.
right, but clearly, well, I say clearly, it had to be a story about him. It wasn't really the real person that Mark is discussing, right? Because it's so much later than the crucifixion. But we'll talk about it. But I do think we concur that he was probably a real person, not just a literary character. But there are people who say that he is a character, and that Mark puts him into his gospel
I don't believe that.
to fill in for Peter.
Could somebody
Um,
make Simon not real and make the effort still of giving it two
Why
kids?
would they say that?
Yeah, why? Well, because now remember, and we're gonna talk more about this when we get to chapter 16. Mark writes this, he says, at the very beginning, I'm writing this so that you know about Jesus, about what happened to Jesus. So he's telling the story, and he's telling the story about all the people who knew Jesus, and all of a sudden, maybe he's not so comfortable taking Peter out of the story completely, as Peter takes himself out with the denial. So Mark puts somebody in the story, another Simon, to kind of fill in for Simon Peter, who denied him 3 times, right? That's why Mark put Simon of Cyrene in there. Say some people. Now, has anybody here ever done the Stations of the Cross?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, then you know Simon, because he's station number 5. Now, did we ever do that here, to your knowledge?
We
No.
did, we did once, I think, as I remember, we were going to try to do that, we didn't have the station, we didn't obviously have the stations, but we did a service once, I think, was here.
Does that sound interesting to anybody? Do you think during Lent that would be something?
It's very powerful to do the stations of the
Very
cross.
poignant, without a doubt, very, very powerful.
And it's done often in the Catholic
Oh,
Church.
Every week.
They put it in the bulletin.
My mother and
station,
father was
stations.
like weekly, all the time, they would say, we go quietly, step away, and they would say it
Yes.
all the time.
Growing up, they did Stations of the Cross once a month in my church.
Yeah.
Through the whole year, and during Lent, they would do it every week.
Now,
On
did they do
Fridays.
it once a month to make sure that you remember how much Jesus suffered for you?
I don't know why they did it.
Oh, but-
It was just part of the
I got you.
story.
And when they did it, you did it, the whole congregation did it together,
Whoever
or?
showed up.
Oh,
It was
so
a-
it wasn't part of the service,
No,
oh,
it
okay.
was, it was
No,
a
no, no.
Friday morning.
And our,
Right.
school, I went to Catholic school till sixth grade. We had to do it at least by fifth grade,
Mhm.
but it was a class. you
Yeah,
know.
it wasn't, yeah.
Now, did the
many
girls
people.
think it was gross, but the guys loved it, cause it was so
No.
bloody? No.
No, I don't know.
Oh,
I
so
didn't-
they
I
kept
don't
it.
There
have
was,
that
but you
memory.
didn't go into this kind of
Oh.
detail, which is really getting to me.
I know, I know.
But we didn't go into that detail, it was just pretty cut and dried, and
Oh.
this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened.
Cause I'm wondering,
It was
how do
more
you
about
do
the-
that with kids?
It was more about the prayer that you were saying at that
I
station
gotcha.
than it was about describing what happened at that point.
Yeah, cause I
Not
wouldn't
only
wanna
that-
deal with little kids, second graders or third graders.
Well, I don't know
Yeah.
when, at what age it started, but you didn't say a word in church, or you would have been taken out of that group
Yeah.
by the nun.
Except for the prayer, I mean, whatever prayer was part of it, I mean, that, for us, we had the, what was read to us explaining what the, station was, and then there was always a little prayer at each station, that's what we did, but,
Yeah, I don't know how you could do the Stations of the Cross
but I don't remember doing
without
that.
experiencing suffering.
I don't
Yeah,
remember doing that when I was like in first or second and third grade, I had to, it had to. be-
Maybe you had to have your first Holy Communion.
Maybe.
I think so too, around that time, I know it was, you're not, yeah, not that young, you were definitely older, CCD classes we had growing up, around that time.
Alright, you guys ready to go back to?
No. Listen, you
What were we
Catholics.
at?
Alright, guys, verse 22. They bring Jesus to Golgotha. Golgotha, the place of the skull. Now, what do you know about Golgotha? You probably know a more familiar name for this place. Do you know another name for Golgotha?
Calvary.
Calvary.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Oh,
Calvary and Golgotha are the same place, and they both mean the place of the skull. Golgotha is Aramaic, and Calvary is Latin. And you know, nobody knows exactly where Golgotha is today. But, of course, that hasn't stopped people from telling you to come here or walk this way. And they're telling you why it's called Golgotha or Calvary. People say it's called the place of the skull because there were plenty of skulls there and plenty of other bones too. And other people say, and I have actually listened to a man tell me, it's called Golgotha because the skull of Adam is buried there. And he
Wow.
believes that, heart and soul. And I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't, I'm just saying,
Something
know
to
that
read.
you're
and today, there is a very famous church built there, and it's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Sepulchre, do you know what that means?
Yeah, burial place.
Burial place. You've been there, right?
I have,
Did you see Adam's skull?
not that I recall.
Did you get down on your knees and touch the space
It's
where
been a
they
long
think it
time.
is?
It was
How to
probably
think, how
25
to-
years
Oh,
ago.
okay.
How do they think? Who brought it up to, over time to say,
Well, it's the
must be
same.
from carried down the line of somebody said it, and then it's this guy,
Yeah.
this guy said this guy, and I just wonder,
How does it
Somebody knows if it's
have
real or not.
that? Absolutely.
Interesting.
Why is that space holy, right? And there are places all over the world that are holy for different cultures, for different reasons.
I saw the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yes,
They showed us the tree that Jesus was under, and I could almost believe it to some extent because they said these trees this tree is 2,000 years old. If that's accurate, then I suppose it's possible.
it's an olive tree, right?
Uh,
Olive trees
again,
live
it's
like
been a
forever,
long- It
yeah.
must have been, it's been a long
Yeah.
time, I can't speak.
Yeah, on the Mount of Olives, that would
Yeah.
make perfect sense, yeah.
But that was Gethsemane.
Yeah.
Yes, they said.
Which means, olive
Oh,
press.
okay.
Yeah, Gethsemane is olive press, that's where people picked the olives and brought them to make olive oil. That they drank, was part of their, they didn't just sprinkle it on romaine and bruschetta, it was part of their. Well, this church of the Holy Sepulchre is, many people believe, is actually the site of the crucifixion. And the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus. So it really is a holy place for some people. And if you go there are all kinds of places. It's kind of been shifted around. I don't know if it's under discussion, but there are places where you can kneel and actually touch. This is where he stumbled, and this is where the cross was buried, and this is, and if you want to see where the cross was, you kind of have to duck and go into that. Do you remember doing
I
that?
do know.
No.
But I do remember walking, would that have been in Jerusalem?
Just outside, yeah.
Walking
Right across the Kidron
through
Valley,
the street,
the Via Dolorosa.
it sounds, I can't, well, you would know. And there were stores all over the place.
Yeah.
And that was the way of the cross.
Yeah, the way of the cross. The way of pain is what they call it. Yeah, yeah.
How far was, his crucifixion on the cross to where he was buried, his tomb? How far is that?
Very
They had
close, very close. When
So
you
it's
see
that skull place,
buried, remember, he
it's near
wasn't
that.
really buried. He was placed in a tomb.
Right, so there's a tomb that was near
Yeah.
that place of
Right,
all the skulls.
very, very close, because poor old Joseph, who was an older gentleman, he and Nicodemus could move the body by themselves. Nobody else was around to help them. They had all forsook. I hadn't used that word in a long time. They all forsook him, and there were just two people left to
The
put
ladies
Jesus.
too, Mary, and they didn't stay?
Well, they wouldn't let the women.
It's,
Oh,
yeah,
close
they took him
to it.
away, didn't,
The women could see
They
the
would've-
crucifixion, but we don't think the male disciples did. They were hiding. They fled.
Oh.
Probably hid in that upper room, away from everybody. Jeanette?
I don't know if we covered that here, but someone, I've heard this somewhere, it's not from me, that, because of the disgust and possible rotting bodies, excuse me, that they wouldn't have had it, real close to Jerusalem, to the city. It would have been on the outskirts, so
Right.
that people wouldn't have to look at it or think of it or
Right.
anything.
Yeah, but of course, we know the Romans weren't really that tidy. They're piglets, but,
I'm talking about the Jews from
from
Jerusalem
Jerusalem.
would be insulted.
Yes, and they had very strict, and I think we'll stop here for today, if that's all right with you, but, because I don't wanna get involved in something that we have to leave, quickly. Yes,
By the way, I found the movie and
Ah.
it's called The Chosen, but,
but not the
That-
series.
It's just,
it was, oh yeah, recently.
Oh, it
But-
was the
I was
TV
so hooked
series.
on that.
But
Thank
that-
you all, send me what you would like to put in your miscellaneous box, what you'd like to know more about.